Hello and welcome to this guidance for the reading paper exam preparation. This particular resource is deliberately created for Year 9 students going into their end of Year 9 test for the first time. These are students who are going to be sitting in the environment you see in the background, surrounded by their classmates and completing a reading comprehension paper on their own at their desk. As you can see from the screen, this is what the exam paper might look like, so take this as an example. As you can see, there are 4 questions being asked here, and each one is worth a different number of marks. Some are worth 1 mark, some are worth 10 marks, and some are worth 5 marks. The questions in general tend to range in order of difficulty, and in this case you can see in bold there are 2 texts the students are going to be asked about. This exam paper is designed to be accessible by all students, with the simpler questions first and some of the harder, more difficult questions later. Most students will work through this in the order they appear, so question 1 or A1 first, down to question A4. Having said that, there are students who might choose to go for the 2 higher mark questions first, in this case question 2 and question 3, simply because they're worth the most marks on the paper. This is an example of one of the texts you'll be given, and in this case it's called text 1. You can see that in the top left of the screen, and you can see the whole text is around about 1 to 2 sides of A4 long, as it appears on the actual exam paper. This is an example of the set text number 2, as you can see in the top left, labelled text 2. You can see this one has a similar number of words, but also has a lot more graphics and things to comment on as well. Now let's start looking back through this exam answer then, or this exam example paper. At this point, you could pause the video and practice these questions through at home using screenshots of this video as examples. So please feel free to pause the video now, have a look at these questions and the 2 texts that were just on the screen, and have a go at answering some of these questions before pressing play and moving on with this recording. Now, as I started this test, as I sat it in timed conditions, just like the students, you'll notice I've immediately started planning my response. You can see I've started highlighting the quotes I think would link to the question, as well as dividing up the text into 3 sections, labelled 1, 2 and 3 on the left-hand side. You can see some quotes have got red underlining on, and others have been highlighted in yellow. After looking back at the questions, I know the first question is going to ask me for a set of facts, and as I read through the text, those facts are the ones that are underlined in red. Then I went to question 2, which is asking for the writer's feelings, Fred Mauer's feelings. So I read back through the text and immediately highlighted a certain number of quotes that link to that question that I think I can comment on the feelings that he's showing through that evidence. When I say a certain number of quotes, we're looking at 10 quotes in this case because it is a 10-mark question. So that's what I was aiming to find, 10 quotes. Now let's look at text number 2. You'll notice on the screen this one's not been highlighted, and that's because I'd like you to do this for yourselves. Question 3 is asking for persuasive devices. How persuasive is the text? Read this through. Can you find all 10 persuasive devices? 10 different ways this text persuades you to go to Camelot theme park? Please feel free to pause the video and highlight this text for those 10 now. Remember, you can comment on pictures, the photos, but make sure there is a mix of the photos as well as the words being used. The best students will also comment on the actual device being used, and previous recordings, previous lessons or videos might well have covered things like da forest or a forest. That's a list of persuasive devices that are likely to appear. So can you find examples of alliteration? Can you find facts, opinions, rhetorical questions, repetition, emotive language, statistics, or magic 3, or triple, depending on which teacher you had teaching you? It's fair to say most of those are there somewhere. You've just got to spend a bit of time finding them in the test and then be ready to comment on them as you write your response. Now let's take a look back at the exam paper with a focus on question 1. Question 1A, B, C and D are all worth a very small number of marks. You can see the 1, 1 and 2 in brackets on the screen. It's those numbers that tell us how many marks the question is worth. That means for 1A, I only need one clear answer. Same thing for question B and C. And then as we look at question D, give the names of 2 rides found at Park Asterix, you'll notice it's 2 marks, and that will be 1 for each of the rides found. Let's have a look then at our response. You'll notice on the left-hand side, I've clearly labelled which question I'm answering. Question 1A, B, C and D, so it's really clear which part of my answer links to which part of the question. You'll also notice that I've spaced them out with spaces in between to make sure the examiner can be clear on which part of the question I'm answering. Each one of these answers are in full sentences, and I'm deliberately wording the question back to the examiner to make sure I've found the right response. So if we look at question 1A, which city of Park Asterix near? Okay, you can see the answer to that would be Paris is the city the park is near. Question B, why would the park be easy to miss? It is easy to miss as all the signs are smaller than Disney. Now some students for 1B would write that it is easy to miss as the signs are smaller. But when you're saying something smaller, you'd need to know smaller than what, which is why I put smaller than Disney on the end to ensure I get the mark. Question 1C, what is Park Asterix based on? Park Asterix is based on a famous comic creation of I think that's Albert Uderzo. That's the information the text give me, so I've given as much information as necessary to answer the question. And lastly, 1D, where I needed to name 2 rides found at Park Asterix. 2 names of attractions are Menhir Express and Le Défi de César. Now this one was a difficult one to answer because it particularly asked for 2 names of rides. So I scanned the piece of writing and looked for things that were in capital letters to ensure I definitely found the name of the ride, not just an example of a ride. If you look back at where I showed you my underlining, you'll notice I underlined carousel. That is an example of a ride found at Park Asterix, but is not the name of one, which is why that would not have got a mark in this case, and so I changed my answer. How many of these did you get right? Take a look at your example, give yourself a mark out of 5 for this particular response, but ensure that they are in full sentences and that you have used the wording of the question back to the exam board to make sure you're definitely finding the right fact to use. Let's now move on to question 2. Question 2. What is Fred Mau's thoughts and feelings about Park Asterix? You should consider what he says, his use of language, tone and structure. And you can see a number 10 and the word marks in brackets, showing this one is worth 10 marks. That would mean then that I need 10 different things to say with 10 different pieces of evidence to back up my points. The exam board kindly give us 2 bullet points to help. What he says implies that you'll need quotes from the extract. His use of language, tone and structure suggests that we also get marks for how he's saying it, the tone, and the order he says it, which is the structure. Most students tend to focus just on the words that he uses, but the top marks would also be commenting on the tone of voice being used and the order the information is given, the order those feelings appear in. Now this is a Year 9 test, so the order won't be overly sophisticated, and there's likely to be one or two things that stand out if you were to read the whole article all the way through. Now let's take a look at my response. You'll immediately notice that I've numbered the question at the top in the left, Q2, and then under that I've put a series of dashes in the margin. You'll find there are 10 dashes in total, each one of those for 1 mark I could get. As I write my response, I ticked off the quotes as I use them. I know that a pass mark is likely to be around half marks, so I got as far as dash number 6 to make sure that I passed the test before moving on. Let's read through my response now then. Remember, I'm focusing on thoughts and feelings of the writer, in this case Fred Mauer. Overall, Fred feels the park is exciting and worth going to. He feels happy. The quote, "refreshingly free," suggests to us that the park is a welcome change and it's not as busy as its rivals. He wishes it was more in line with Gaelic ideas, as he says, "A lack of wild boar on the menu is a pity," which suggests to us he feels they haven't done enough with the park. Having said that, he uses the statement, "This destination is worth the time," to suggest you should visit, as he feels it is hours well spent and enjoyable. He is pleased that it is cheap. It costs a lot less money, which suggests that he thinks the park has value compared with Disney World. He makes clear that it appeals to adults. Sparks of humour. This is a metaphor which suggests the park is full of energy and is great to go to. He calls it thoroughly entertaining, which exaggerates all the different ways you can have fun there. As you can see, I've highlighted my answer for 3 things that would get me a grade. 1, the quotes, which are in yellow. 2, in orange, you'll find the links to the reader, how it affects us. And 3, in green, you've got the technical language. Technical language are the particular words and phrases that you label ways of speaking in English. So things like word, sentence, noun, verb, adjective, simile, alliteration are all examples of technical language. The word or the phrase quote or phrase are not seen as technical language, okay, but a particular phrase that shows that you understand the kind of language being used is, so as I said, simile, alliteration, even descriptive sentence would count to the exam board as technical language. You can go much more advanced than that. You could go as far as juxtaposition or enjambement, but in this case, in Year 9, we would just be looking for a very small amount of technical language that you found. Now, the trick with technical language is 1, to learn the features themselves and be able to identify them in a piece of writing, but also 2, not to search too hard for it in the writing. You don't want to spend the time hunting for techniques or technical language that aren't actually there. If, when you've got your list of quotes, you notice just by chance that there is a certain technique used, feel free to comment on it. But don't try and force the technical language. If you don't know what kind of device it's using, then just use the word quote instead. Getting it wrong is not a good idea. Play it safe, particularly in Year 9. Okay, you'll notice when I've explained my quotes, each one is round about 2 sentences apart. That gives you the idea of how much I need to write about each one. If you were to highlight your own work in the same way, which I recommend you do, look at how much of a gap there is between each quote. Have you explained the quote enough? Be ready to give an example if you need to of where you've explained your work, okay, where you've explained your quotes. Notice it's one big block of writing, and I've tried to link as much as I can to Fred's feelings or thoughts. I've also made sure that I explain exactly what the quote means. So, for example, when I said sparks of humour, which sounds like the part's going to be fun, I thought, well, why is the word sparks being used? Well, sparks are linked to electricity, which is why I said that the park is full of energy. It's as if the park is filled with this electricity that makes it live, that makes it interesting, that makes it exciting. And that's how I got to my conclusion there, where I said, this is a metaphor which suggests the park is full of energy and is great to go to. It's worth a bit of time just thinking about the quote and exactly what effects are created through the use of that quote. Let's now move on then to question 3 of 4. Question 3 now asks us to look at the second leaflet, or the second text, text 2. How does the leaflet try to persuade the reader to go to the amusement park? You should consider what it says and how it says it. Now in this case we're looking at presentation features, which are to do with the language, but also the way the writing is presented is equally persuasive. So things like photos, titles, subheadings, captions under those photos, what details the photos include, also would get some marks. But as I said, make sure it's equally weighted, to use some quotes, but also some links to the photos that you can use. Once again, 10 marks awarded, which is in brackets there, which tells me I need to find 10 bits of evidence and 10 different things to say. I hopefully at this point have found the persuasive device it uses, so it should be worth just looking back at the highlighting you did and then converting those into sentences. Remember what I said for question 2, each quote should be explained in around about 2 sentences, and if you happen to find a persuasive device you know you can label, please do name it. Let's now have a look at my example. You can see this one's a little bit longer, and once again I've done dashes underneath my Q3 on the left, indicating how many marks I would get, and I've ticked off each dash as I worked through my answer, so I was checking how many quotes I had. Now some of you listening to this will say, well, why do that? Well, one, it takes a few seconds, maybe 5 seconds maybe to do. And secondly, it means that as I rush through my answer, remember I'm doing this in the example under time and conditions, I'm very quickly getting an idea of how many quotes I've already used, knowing how many I'd still need to use in order to pass this section of the test. Now, the second thing you'll notice there is that I've divided this answer into 3 pieces. I've looked at an overview, starting with overall in my sort of first sentence. Then I've begun to look at quotes after that. And in the bottom section, I've begun looking at pictures and graphics, making clear to the examiner that I've got an overview of the whole text, I know the language being used, and I've also looked at how that information is being conveyed or shown through the pictures and the graphics. So all 3 things that I know I'm being assessed for are included. Let's take a read through. Overall, the leaflet is persuasive as it uses pictures and words to explore how good Camelot is. An overall, an overview, a short introduction there of only 1 sentence long, but I would get 1 mark for that. One thing it does say is how you will learn a lot. Now that particular quote's even in the question the exam board have given, play a lot, learn a lot. It wouldn't take much to notice that the actual title, which is right across the middle of the advert, already uses repetition, it repeats a lot, and it also suggests something to do with education, learning a lot, and that's been placed right in the centre of the leaflet. So there's quite a few marks I could have gotten just out of that quote alone. This is persuasive as it uses a large font that's in the middle to suggest to us that education is really important. This juxtaposes the spell at Camelot, as the park is magical as well as educational, which could appeal to the audience. It asks rhetorical questions to help, such as, "Are you brave enough to investigate?" which challenges us to explore the part further and makes us curious. The magic 3, sliding, climbing, bouncing, which can be found on the left-hand side piece of writing on the leaflet itself, suggest to us that the park is an adventure and therefore action-packed things. There are lots of action-packed things to do. It also gives comments such as, "Put together the clues to suggest that we are forced to explore the park and solve the mystery." The pictures show lots of people smiling and looking like they're having fun and enjoying themselves, which suggests the park will be fun for us. The cartoon skeleton makes us remember funny cartoons on television, and this would be persuasive. It implies the park will be entertaining. Have a look at the highlighting there. You'll notice I've once again highlighted quotes in yellow, links to the reader in orange, and technical language, in this case persuasive features, I've highlighted in green. You'll immediately notice there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 quotes or 7 pieces of evidence, so it's likely that I probably get about 7 out of 10 for this question. Once again, they're spaced out, roughly at least a sentence written about each one. And you'll notice there's quite frequent links to the reader. Words like you, us, we, or even I would give an idea of what effect is caused by these different quotes, how they make me feel, how they make me react. There's a little bit less technical language here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And once again, I would expect if you happen to notice a technical device, please comment on it, but don't force it. I think many students listening would work out that "Are you brave enough to investigate?" is a rhetorical question, as that's quite a one you learn, I think, at primary school, so it wouldn't take much to be able to label that with the correct device. Less students might notice sliding, climbing, bouncing. That could be called a list, but I've decided it is a magic 3. It is a triple, as it gives me 3 exciting activities or 3 exciting verbs that I can do on the park. And there is only 3 of them, so I thought, no, probably a magic 3 being used there. The other thing you need to notice is what I've said about each quote. I've thought once more about exactly what that quote means and done my best to explain that particular device. So I've linked the word spell to magic. I've looked at the phrase brave enough and suggest that implies a challenge of some kind. And obviously sliding, climbing, bouncing all suggest quite a physical adventure that I could go on if I was to go to this park, Camelot. Once again, highlight your own work in the same way. Have a look at how far apart your quotes actually are. Have you explained them enough? And think how many quotes you've actually used. Have you used enough quotes to get the number of marks awarded for this question? Now let's move on to question 4. Using information from both texts, explain briefly, in your own words, how amusement parks are presented. There are key parts to this question. First off, it makes clear you need both texts, text 1 and text 2. It asks you to do it in your own words, which suggests you do not need quotes, question 4. And then it gives you a topic, how amusement parks are presented. It's got 5 marks in brackets, which tells you there are 5 marks being awarded for this question. This is my answer then. You can see it's been divided up into 3 pieces, and these are 3 times I've compared text 1 with text 2. If you rewind this video and look back, you'll notice on my planning I divided each text up into different parts, 3 parts. That shows then I was getting ready to answer question 4, because I knew to get all 5 marks I need to make 3 comparisons. Now the leaflet is harder to do that with because it's not written as paragraphs, it's written as like mini paragraphs scattered all over the page. So I'd probably just ring 2 or 3 mini paragraphs and roughly speaking label that as part 1, part 2, part 3. If you didn't already do that with your text, please do that now. Divide each one into 3 pieces, which will enable you to easily answer question 4. Question 4 is a summary question where you're being asked to edit down each of those 3 pieces into single sentences and compare them. For example, text 1 presents amusement parks as a place that appeals to adults and children, whereas text 2 makes parks appeal more to children as magical places. There I've compared text 1 with text 2 and said they are different. Text 1 tells us in detail about different rides that can be found there. Similarly, text 2 also tells us these parks have exciting rides. You can see I've edited down each text to a sentence. I've looked at my section 2 on my planning and then compared them using the connective similarly. Lastly, text 1 compares Park Asterix to Disney World, while, in contrast, text 2 makes clear how new and exciting Camelot is. Once again, editing down that part of the text to a sentence and using the connective in contrast to compare the two. For this question then, I've highlighted my connectives to make sure I'm comparing the two texts, and then I've made sure I've made enough comparisons to get the full 5 marks awarded. Notice I've not used any quotes for this question because the exam board clearly stated it needs to be in my own words. Thank you very much then for listening to this guide to the reading paper exam preparation, a shortened guide for the Year 9 end of Year 9 test. Thank you very much for listening.